Pichit and Dr. Imjit, thank you so much for creating such a beautiful space for us to come together to dialogue on your campus. Let me thank my senior and somebody who's given me a lot of wisdom over the years, Han Young Wei, who has taught me a lot about Myanmar and guided our work over the last 10 years or more. And acknowledge Dr. Norbert Ropers, who's somewhere in the room, for being a champion for peace for so many of us, and somebody who for so many decades has been ahead of his time in creativity and in making sure that we never have lost our will and our energy for conflict transformation in this region. Let me start by opening with the UN Day prayer, the Islamic prayer for UN Peace Day. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, praise be to the Lord of the universe who has created us and made us many tribes and nations that we may know each other and enrich one another. About this time 5 years ago, as Han has mentioned, the Myanmar peace process was getting underway, and at the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies we had an unusual request. It was from the Karen National Union to go and meet with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front in Cotabato City in Mindanao. Their request was that while they had had many peace teachers and many peace advisors, they really wanted to hear from those who had brokered a ceasefire and were continuing their negotiations for peace. We thought, okay, that doesn't sound too scary, we'll give that a go. But actually, as somebody growing up in a rural part of Australia, I was a little nervous about how this might go. In fact, I had to eat humble pie and began to realize that the Moro Islamic Liberation Front was in fact the best teacher that the KNU could have. They had the opportunity to sit with the chair of the MILF negotiation panel, Mahathir Iqbal, and one of his first pieces of advice to them was, just when you think you're ready, be sure you are not ready. He said, prepare, prepare, prepare. And when you think you've prepared enough, prepare a little bit more. He explained that as an armed group, as a non-state actor, that you are well trained to fight in the jungle, that you know how to blow things up, but negotiations are a different arena and require a special kind of training and skill, a particular knowledge and awareness, special tactics, strategies and skills. He understood that when you're facing a government that has all of the resources that they can muster, that you yourselves need to be much better prepared than you think you do. Secondly, he said, something that I was a little unsure about. He said, you must maintain military discipline. He said, military discipline is not just for fighting wars. He said, when you sign a ceasefire agreement, you need to be sure that your chain of command is intact. A ceasefire, as Han has pointed out this morning, is not just to disarm. It's not to give up your weapons. A ceasefire is the ceasing of hostilities so that talks can go on. If you sign a peace agreement, you need to be sure that everybody that follows you, all of your troops, and all of your people are ready to work together with you to implement that agreement. You can negotiate confidently knowing that you can deliver on your promise. Thirdly, he said, you think negotiating with your opponent is difficult, but negotiating with your own group is much more difficult. He said, unifying and bringing your people together with the many factions and splinters that have grown over the years of the struggle, bringing the community along and mobilizing people to unity is one of the hardest things you will ever have to do in a peace process. Since then, the Karen National Union have learned these lessons for themselves and have always heeded the advice of the MILF. Unity building, preparation, trying to maintain a level of military discipline without being perceived as a threat to their partner for peace in the government and the military. As a result of this exchange and the wisdom shared from one armed group to another, we started to understand as a Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies that we really needed to look differently at the frameworks we had and to look a little closer at what was going on in our own region. So I want to share a little bit of that framework that we've started and only begun to unpack today. First, I know there are many of you from other parts of the world, and I hate to generalize, but I do want to share a little bit of the trends that we're seeing around the world in peace processes. And I think many of those peace processes were flashed up on the screen in the video this morning. We have seen a lot of this big man mediator flying in somebody from New York to put the parties together in a room in Geneva and try and solve the conflict as quickly as possible. We've seen a lot of competition between the United Nations and regional organizations, between even continental organizations like the African Union and ECOWAS, competing to try and be the mediator that brokered the peace first. We've seen forum shopping. It's a word I learned in Europe. It's about trying to get as many NGOs as possible to be your advisor, or playing them off against each other to see which deal you can get and how well you can get your peace process along the journey. We see very short time frames. We're going to achieve Syrian peace by next year. We're going to solve this conflict by such and such a date. We've seen quite traditional models of mediation. Two parties, one guy in the middle, trying to talk to one another. I think we saw something yesterday like that happening in Kazakhstan. And last but not least, very ego-driven peace processes. Processes where people come out claiming credit for what's happening. Everybody, as soon as a peace deal is done, issuing their media statement to say how well they had contributed to this particular peace process. I'm proud to say, as a citizen of this region, that I think perhaps in Asia we may be just doing a little better on this. And I'll give you some examples. We've seen some shifts in this ASEAN region. In Mindanao, we see countries like Brunei and Malaysia actively contributing to the peace process. And while there are debates about the interest of those countries in those places, they have significantly contributed a huge amount of money, troops, human resources in order to try and make the ceasefire work there. In Myanmar, we've seen the rise of an insider mediator model. The rejection of many, many mediators who came to from Myanmar to offer their support to the peace process. But in the end, it was a minister for railways, a general himself, who really became the insider mediator to kick off the process. So a whole different model to how we've understood mediation in other parts of the world, and something that we can learn from. Last but not least, I think we've seen here the robust rise of very useful and flexible, comprehensive peace infrastructure. A whole system of support mechanisms around a peace process, which is not dependent on one person or one facilitator or one mediator. And I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. Those of you who are students of peace studies or would like to look into this more, there is a very good book that you can read, Geopolitics of Emotion. And it talks a lot about the Asia region as being the region of hope, the place where we have a lot of possibility. As Han described this morning, many challenges, but equally many opportunities and many possibilities for us to shift the dynamics of armed conflict in our corner of the globe. So what have we learned? From the Myanmar process and from the Philippines, we've learned the importance of political will. Without top-level buy-in, without political parties, governments, and armed groups being serious politically that they want to make this work, then there is no need to start on a peace process. Political will in the Myanmar case, when President Aquino flew to Japan on the secret meeting he had with Chairman Murad, which the next day became public, was so fundamental to both men. President Aquino described the importance of looking Chairman Murad in the eye and knowing his sincerity. Chairman Murad welcomed the opportunity to tell the President directly what it is he wanted from the peace process. In this moment, the trust between the two parties skyrocketed. The possibility to have direct communication and then to delegate to their respective negotiation panels their conversation changed the course of the peace process towards the final agreement. In Myanmar, political will has been equally important, and one of the challenges that I think we'll face in the next 5 years is how to be sure that that political will at that level is maintained. Political will, however, is not enough unless it translates into military discipline. And as Chairman Iqbal had said, the military discipline of an armed group is important, but equally is the military discipline of a government. In 2011, we faced a terrible tragedy in Basilan, the Al Baraka massacre. Some of you will know about it. Armed forces of the Philippines troops strayed into an area controlled by the MILF. They violated the terms of the ceasefire. 19 soldiers were beheaded that day after hours and hours of fighting. Of course, as you can imagine, in Manila, people were very angry. Interestingly was the response of the Commander-in-Chief, President Aquino. He said, "We will not allow this incident to defer us or divert us from the peace process." In the next days, he court-martialed 4 of the commanders responsible for those troops. You can imagine the backlash of people in the Philippines. Equally, the MILF responded by disciplining their commanders in that incident. Both men, because of their political will and commitment to the process, did not allow one incident to stop the process, and in both cases, disciplined their own forces for the violation of the ceasefire. Leadership beyond compare. Beyond political will is the fundamental need to mobilize communities behind the peace process. The MILF have learned for so long, and Han pointed it out this morning, without the people, the process is nothing. The process must make people the center. If what you're agreeing at the table is not widely supported and endorsed by both communities, those that support insurgents or freedom fighters or whatever you want to use as the term, and as we've learned from Colombia, if the people who voted for the government that negotiated the peace don't understand, support, or respect the process will not be sustainable. So bringing the people with us, the MILF have been skilled at consulting their people, going back to the ground to translate the agreement and then take the concerns of people back to the peace table. One of the most creative institutions I've ever seen in our part of the world is the Bangsamoro Leadership and Management Institute. It's an institute that was set up by the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front together to prepare the leadership of the Moros towards their autonomy in the future. It was established 5 years before the final agreement was signed. The intention was, if as a government we are serious that we will somehow transform this conflict, we need to help already the MILF make the transition from being armed group leaders to responsible political leaders that can work with the system. So the BLMI is run by the MILF. It is funded by the Philippine government, but it works only for MILF combatants, leaders, in giving them leadership and management skills for the future. This kind of vision and foresight and leadership changes the sincerity and the dynamic and the trust between the two parties. In both Myanmar and the Philippines, we've seen the emergence of a very complex infrastructure around the peace talks. And I'll show you a couple of diagrams, which I can give you an entire lecture on, all of its own. But as you'll see in the Philippines, in the Philippine government MILF process, this is the example or picture of the architecture in 2013. By 2015, it had changed again. So an architecture which is not stagnant, but keeps evolving as new challenges and new issues arise. What we've come to understand is that the one-man mediator is not enough, that we need an entire system of structures and institutions and people working together towards the same shared goal of supporting the peace process. Over many years, I've been asked to speak often about what it's been like to be a woman in a peace process. And of course, I stand by the need for us to have greater gender equality in all aspects of peace processes. But I've also learned that it takes a whole community to make a peace process. That also means young people and older people. It means academics. It means people who have legal expertise, those that understand the ground. It means Indigenous people. In the MILF case, of course, there were Moros from the government side and Moros on the MILF side. It means religious diversity. And so what we've come to understand is even the MILF, through the process, has started to say that the autonomy they fight for in the Bangsa Moro is not just for Moro Muslims. It's for the Indigenous people and communities that they will represent into the future. It's for the Christian settlers that over many hundreds of years have moved into their area. And that their responsible, political, recognized leadership will govern in the future for all of those people, not just those that are like them. Trust building, we know, and as peace builders, we say it so easily. Trust building, we know how to do that. We just put people together, they talk to each other, they like each other, you have trust. But the truth is, we know that trust building takes a huge amount of effort, and in some cases it's not just about drinking and singing karaoke together, it's about really honouring the commitments that you have made. I mentioned already that Chairman Iqbal had said building trust with your own side is difficult, and Minister U Ong Min very often said one of the hardest tasks he had in the Myanmar peace process was to build trust with the military. And he spent much more time in meetings with his own military than with the other side. He also says that trust is based on real respect. And there are far too many examples of when we show up at peace talks and we can greet each other appropriately, but without feeling that heartfelt, empathetic respect for the other side. Trust, therefore, is based on human-centered approaches. We have to be tough on the issues, but we don't need to be tough on the people. And I hope that Chair Miriam Ferrer of the Philippine government doesn't mind me sharing this picture of where she very often would sing songs playing a guitar, but also because she felt the safe space of the peace talks room that she was in. I think some of you know David Gorman, who worked very often in this part of the world, very often celebrated each little step of the agreement along the way. And this, my favorite picture, some of you will know General Gunmo, who leads the Kachin Independence Army. On one occasion went out to the bathroom, and when he returned found that Minister U Ong Min from the Myanmar government was sitting in his seat on the other side of the table. So he took an opportunity to say, "Very good, sir, I'll take your seat and let's continue the negotiations." And of course it was greeted with much hilarity around the room and a lot of laughter. Tough on issues, but soft on people. At the end of the day, we're all in this together and we all want peace. It doesn't mean that we slight the difficulties and the challenges that we have at the table, but we need to see each other beyond the issues. Last but not least, I want to share with you a picture of the Malaysian facilitator for the MILF process. I know that there's much we could say about Malaysian government as a mediator in processes, but I have to say that in the MILF process, Datu Tengku, who sadly passed away last year, was somebody who valued his ability to read a room. He was deeply emotionally intelligent. He never once took credit for the comprehensive agreement of the Bangsamoro. He was egoless in his task. In this way, it made him an honest broker, somebody who saw his role as to help the parties towards their shared vision, to be tough on issues, soft on people, but equally to make sure that the parties were up front. Parties were always up front in his peace room and in every conversation he had outside. I think it's important for us to remember that it's not one man that makes peace, but all of us in a community together. We have done well as a region in solving many of our protracted armed conflicts. Bougainville, Aceh, Cambodia. We're making progress in Myanmar, as Han has reminded us. Mindanao has still a long way to go. As we sit here together, the Communist Party talks are going on in Rome, facilitated by the Norwegians with the Philippine government. But there are two things that we still have a lot to learn about. One is how to implement agreements adequately that we sufficiently address the concerns as to why people took up arms in the first place. Secondly, we need to see more genuine efforts to address the structural violence of our region. Who are those that are left out? Who do we not see in our economic systems, in our cultural norms, in our worldviews? And sooner or later, do we really negotiate structural violence at a peace table? Or does it already come from the political will and the willingness of governments and leaders across our region to say enough is enough? We need to equitably share the resources, the identities, and the beautiful diversity of the region that we live in. I want to close with the end of the prayer from UN Peace Day. If the enemy inclines towards peace, do thou also incline towards peace, and trust in God, for the Lord is one that hears and knows all things. And the servants of God, the people of God, most gracious, are those who walk on the earth with humility, egoless. And when we address them and we speak to one another, do we start with the word peace? Thank you.